Ethan Walker never imagined that the moment capable of determining the future of an entire airline industry would begin with a cold command, sharp as a blade, cutting through the first-class cabin. "You need to vacate this seat right now." That tone did more than shatter the quiet atmosphere. It ripped apart the line between calm and chaos, between respect and insult. In the instant, every gaze swung toward him. Ethan felt as if all 3 decades of his life, from the sleepless nights, chasing scholarships to the day he signed the acquisition of North Star Airlines, were being crushed inside one small, merciless moment. He lifted his head, slowly steady, and looked straight into the doubtful eyes of Sharon Miles, the chief flight attendant standing before him, with the posture of someone holding authority, though her voice carried the familiar prejudice Ethan had known since he was a boy in the south side of Chicago. First class froze the air thick enough to hear someone's heartbeat stumble in shock. A middle-aged couple held their breath. A young businessman glanced over confused. Ethan pressed his lips together as an old thread of memory trembled awake, all the questions that once cut straight into his childhood. "Are you sure this is your class? You're in the wrong section," kid suddenly replaying in perfect clarity within 3 seconds. He fought to keep his voice calm. "I believe there must be a mistake. This is my seat." But Sharon's eyes held no patience. Linda Kramer, her colleague beside her, avoided Ethan's gaze completely, as if he were a problem to be handled, rather than a passenger to be served. "Seat 2A belongs to a very important passenger, Mr. Gregory Holt." Sharon said slowly, each word sharp. "He flies this route all year, and perhaps there was a system error." Those words stretched the tension in the cabin to the breaking point. Something inside Ethan, something he had spent a lifetime containing, began to grind against his composure. But he refused to react on instinct. Every passenger was watching, judging, measuring his worth. Ethan set his tablet down, lifted his head, and for a moment the roar of the engines faded into nothing. Only one cold question echoed in his mind. How many more times will this happen to people like me? Sharon stepped half a pace closer, close enough that her voice turned sharper, but loud enough for others to hear. "If you cooperate, we will move you to economy and provide a refund voucher. If you do not cooperate, I will have to call security." The sentence was the spark to a fuse. A young woman in the cabin raised her phone to record. An older businessman frowned in irritation. A man in the row behind muttered, "What the hell, he looks more like a tycoon than anyone here." Ethan felt heat rush up his spine, humiliation rising sharp beneath the layer of steel discipline he had forged for himself. In his mind flashed the image of his father, the hard-working mailman who told him, "Ethan, they will try to make you smaller, but you must always know how big you are." He exhaled not from exhaustion, but to stop himself from saying something he would regret. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the first-class ticket paid for, with an amount even an investment director would think twice about spending. Here he offered it to Sharon. "Seat 2A. My name, the flight date today." Sharon glanced at it, barely looking, treating it like a procedural annoyance. "I see that," she said, returning it with a clipped tone. "But Mr. Gregory Holt has been booking this seat for many years. Please cooperate." In that instant, Ethan understood the issue had nothing to do with the ticket, nothing to do with the system, nothing to do with policy. The issue was him, the color of his skin, and that realization darkened the entire cabin, heavy like a storm that had been gathering forever and just needed someone to flip a switch. And then the switch appeared. Gregory Holt, silver-haired, wrapped in a charcoal suit and wearing a watch worth as much as a sedan, entered the cabin, scanned the room, then pointed straight at Ethan. "That is my seat. I always sit there. Move." The words pounded against Ethan's dignity like a hammer. At least 3 people gasped. What Ethan looked at Gregory, then at the 2 flight attendants, then at his own hand, where the ticket still sat, clearly printed cold and powerless. For a moment he felt as if he were standing at the edge of history, where thousands before him had been pushed off the cliff of prejudice. And then Ethan's voice rose deep, solid, restrained, yet powerful enough to silence the entire first-class cabin. "If I get out of this seat, it will not be because he wants it. It will be because you choose to treat me as someone who does not have the right to sit here." At the back of the cabin, a passenger whispered, "This is going to blow up." And it would. It would not just blow up. It would burn everything. But Ethan did not yet know that in just a few hours the very man being humiliated right now would change the fate of the entire airline and an entire generation. That morning, Chicago was draped in a warm, golden hue, as if the city had no idea that a seismic wave was waiting to erupt from the 38th floor of North Star headquarters. Early sunlight poured through the clear glass, casting a bright streak across the contemplative face of Ethan Walker as he stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the crowds and streams of traffic flowing like the giant lifelines of the city. In that moment, no one could possibly imagine that just a few hours later, the quiet, composed man standing there would become the center of national attention. But right now, Ethan was thinking about something entirely different. The promise he made to his mother before she passed, that he would live strong enough to break the limits previous generations could not. Inside the vast office, an almost eerie stillness filled the space. The long walnut desk, the metallic gleam of the National Leadership Award, and the framed photograph of his father, a gentle, smiling mailman together, painted the arc of Ethan's life from humble roots to towering success. He brushed his hand lightly over his father's old leather briefcase resting on the desk, the item he carried on every business trip as a reminder. Never forget where you came from. The office door opened softly. Marcus Reed, his energetic young assistant, stepped in with barely contained urgency. "Ethan, the car is ready. Today's schedule is packed, landing at LAX at 2:15, meeting at the hotel at 4, and the call with the finance team at Singapore Airlines tonight." Ethan nodded, fatigue flickering across his features for a brief second, though his eyes remained sharp. "Thank you, Marcus. Did you double-check the merger files?" Marcus held up the report, his hand trembling slightly with nerves. "Yes, sir. Everything is already loaded into your tablet." Ethan smiled, his composed presence giving Marcus a burst of confidence. "Good work." As Marcus stepped out, Ethan's phone rang. The caller ID displayed Patricia Green, CFO, and the most seasoned right hand he had. "Ethan," her voice deep and concerned, "are you sure you're flying commercial today? You know we have a private jet." "Patricia, you know my philosophy. There is no better way to understand customers than to experience what they experience. You flew economy last time. This time, at least, let yourself be a little more comfortable." Ethan chuckled softly, a sound that admitted Patricia was often right. "Don't worry. I'm flying first class today." "Seat 2A. On the other end, a half-second of silence. "All right. Good luck, then. And Ethan, make sure you attend Jasmine's graduation." Ethan's lips curved gently, his eyes softening at the thought of the niece he adored more than anything. "I won't miss it. Not ever." After hanging up, he opened a photo of Jasmine, beaming in her cap and gown, warmth flooding his chest. Yet behind that joy was a faint unease, the kind of instinct people who have fought too many battles can sense clearly. Leaving his office, Ethan stepped into the private elevator. During the descent from the 38th floor to the lobby, he thought about his speech that evening, about the multi-billion-dollar merger, about the responsibility of steering an airline on the brink of its strongest recovery in history. Then a sudden thought slipped into his mind. A day this peaceful, is it a warning? The car stopped at the main entrance. Thomas, Ethan's personal driver of 4 years, opened the door with a small smile. "Good morning, sir. Traffic to the airport is a bit heavy but manageable." Ethan stepped into the car, his hand still on the old leather briefcase. "Thank you, Thomas." Straight to O'Hare. On the road, Chicago flashed by like quick film frames, commuters honking cars and shards of sunlight breaking through the window glass. Ethan watched it all with the eyes of a man who had lived through both the brightness and the shadows of life. In that rare moment of stillness, he remembered the first time he ever sat in a first-class seat, not as a CEO, but as a young analyst using his entire savings to buy a ticket just to impress an investor. That day, he was asked 3 times whether he had entered the wrong cabin, and he vowed that one day he would make such questions obsolete. When the car stopped at the terminal, Ethan stepped out with a poised yet unobtrusive presence. Some people recognized him, but most merely glanced, assuming he was another business traveler among hundreds passing through the airport each day. Ethan preferred it that way. Normalcy helped him see the world more clearly. He navigated the TSA pre-check area effortlessly. A young black officer hesitated, then approached him. "Are you Ethan Walker? I heard you speak at my school once." Ethan smiled and placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Keep going. Don't let anyone tell you you don't belong where you want to be." The officer's face lit up, and in that brief moment, Ethan felt the real reason he chose to fly commercial, to remember that behind every ticket, every flight, were people, dreams, and journeys through invisible barriers. At gate B12, Ethan chose a quiet corner and opened his tablet to review customer reports. Everything looked solid except one detail that tightened his brow. Complaints about flight attendant attitude had risen on several routes. "Needs improvement," he noted sharply. Suddenly, he overheard 2 flight attendants ahead of him, Sharon and Linda, gossiping about passengers who acted like they owned the airplane, their mocking laughter laced with contempt. "If anyone tries to show off, I'll throw them to economy immediately," Sharon said. Linda snorted. "Teach them a lesson." Ethan remained still, not turning around, but his heart dropped a beat. Let's hope it's not them today, he thought. But fate has a habit of teasing people. When the announcement invited first-class passengers to board, Ethan stood, walked toward the gate, and saw Sharon and Linda looking at him with cold, evaluating eyes. In that moment, he had no idea that within minutes, the peaceful sky outside the window would turn into the greatest storm of his life and of the entire airline industry. The moment Ethan stepped onto the jet bridge, a strange sensation ran along his spine, not from the cold, but from instinct, the kind of instinct he had honed after decades of walking through doors that did not always open to welcome him. Inside the first-class cabin, warm golden light filled the space. Premium leather seats were spaced far apart for perfect privacy, and the faint scent of oakwood and lavender drifted gently through the air. A place that should have been a peaceful oasis for elite travelers was quietly preparing to become the scene of a storm. Ethan carefully placed his father's leather briefcase into the overhead compartment, adjusted his collar, and sat down in seat 2A, the spot he always chose, because it was far enough for focus, yet close enough to observe the crew's behavior. He had barely opened his tablet when he felt a sharp gaze coming from the left. Sharon stood a few steps away, her expression no longer relaxed or professional, the way it had been when she greeted other passengers. For the middle-aged couple, she bowed and offered champagne. For the young businessman, she flashed a warm smile. For the film producer in row 3, her voice softened into gentle courtesy. But when it was Ethan's turn, the smile vanished, as if someone had flipped a switch. "Sir, please show your ticket again," Sharon said, her tone stripped of even the most basic respect. Ethan stayed calm and handed it to her. She held it, barely looked at it for 3 seconds while pretending to inspect it thoroughly, then lifted it toward the light in a pointless display that nearby passengers could clearly see. Linda stood behind her with arms crossed her eyes, scanning Ethan from head to toe with open suspicion. "You are sitting in 2A, correct?" Sharon asked again, as if Ethan did not understand seat numbers. "Yes," Ethan replied, his voice even, and still like a lake before a storm. But the stillness would not last, because at that moment Gregory Holt appeared at the front of the cabin, large-built, wearing a deep grey suit and a luxury watch glinting under the cabin lights. He walked, while complaining to Linda, "I always sit in 2A. Always. It is my lucky seat on this route. Someone absolutely needs to fix this." Sharon and Linda exchanged a knowing glance, and then both looked toward Ethan. Their eyes pressed in one unspoken thought Ethan had heard too many times in his life. "You do not belong here," Linda whispered. "Let me talk to him." Sharon shook her head. "No, let me handle it. This needs someone firm." Sharon walked to row 2A, standing tall, her fists tightening as if preparing to confront a troublemaker. "Mr. Walker," she began, her voice sweeter now, but still weighed down with reluctance. "We need to verify your reservation. There is a very important passenger who always sits in this seat." Ethan looked up, his expression neither softening nor hardening, simply displaying the calm of someone who had endured too many small cuts to his dignity. "I understand. But this is the ticket I paid for. There is no mistake here." Sharon's lips twitched into a thin, irritated smile. "But Mr. Gregory is a platinum-tier customer who has flown this route for almost 10 years. He always sits here. Please cooperate. We can arrange a very good seat for you in economy." The offer felt like a slap to Ethan's face, not because they asked him to move to a lower cabin, but because of how they said it, how they insisted his presence here was unusual. In row 3, a woman whispered to her companion, "What is going on? He clearly has a first-class ticket." An older man shook his head, muttering, "This is not about the seat. I saw that look." Sharon crossed her arms, tension rising. "If you do not cooperate, we will have to call security." In that instant, the cabin cracked open. A young tech passenger raised his phone and began recording. A purple-haired girl in row 3 covered her mouth in shock. Standing behind Sharon, Gregory clasped his hands together and smirked. "Let's get this done quickly. I have a meeting at 7 o'clock in Los Angeles." Ethan inhaled deeply, humiliation pressing against his throat. But he refused to let himself break. He remembered his father's words. "You do not need to shout to be heard. You just need to stand firm so you cannot be pushed down." He answered in a voice quiet, but heavy as stone. "If I leave this seat, it will not be because I am wrong. It will be because you choose to treat me wrong." A wave of whispers rippled through the back of the cabin. Sharon clenched her jaw. Linda stepped closer. Gregory crossed his arms, triumphant. "Come on, man, don't make this complicated. It is just a seat." "If it is just a seat," Ethan said, turning to look directly at him, "then sit in yours, seat 2C. Gregory choked on his retort, but before he could speak, Sharon raised her hand, as if issuing a command. "I am calling security right now." And that was the moment the cabin erupted into chaos. Half the passengers lifted their phones to record. The other half stood and began protesting. An older woman shouted, "This is wrong. I have flown my whole life, and I have never seen anything this disgraceful." Sharon ignored everything. She had already pressed the call button, and Ethan knew from that second on the storm had truly begun. The footsteps of airport security echoed down the aisle, loud and deliberate. The cabin tightened into a clenched fist. Officer Dana Williams appeared, her eyes widening when she saw Ethan, whom she recognized from financial news articles. But protocol still forced her to say the sentence Ethan had feared for years, the sentence that had shattered countless dreams of people like him. "So please come with us." Ethan stood. He did not shout. He did not argue. Only a dull ache moved through his heart, not for himself, but for all those who had ever been treated like intruders in the very place they paid to belong. As he stepped out of first class, a young woman whispered, "This story is going to blow up the whole country." She was right. But Ethan did not yet know that the explosion would not only shake an airline to its core, it would ignite a revolution in the way people treated one another from the skies all the way down to the ground. The airplane door closed behind Ethan with a dry final click, as if it was not him being pushed out, but the entire world inside choosing to detach itself from him. The jet bridge stretched ahead in a cold, metallic tunnel, white lights sweeping across the steel floor like they were ushering him into an invisible courtroom where every unseen gaze was already passing judgment. Officer Dana Williams walked beside him, her black shoes striking the ground in steady, measured beats. She said nothing until they were fully clear of the boarding area. "I am sorry, Mr. Walker," she whispered quietly enough that only he could hear. "I know you did nothing wrong." Ethan looked at her, not with anger, but with the deep exhaustion of a man far too familiar with being treated like a troublemaker even when he had done nothing but sit in the seat he paid for. "I know," he replied softly. "You are doing your job. It just never gets easier." Dana nodded, her expression warm with understanding. They stopped in the wide, empty space near Gate B12. But in the distance, the crowd of passengers who had witnessed the incident had already begun to gather, many still live streaming and calling Ethan by a name they did not fully know yet, but one that had already become a symbol within minutes: the man in seat 2A. "This way," Dana urged, trying to reduce the attention, but it was too late. A purple-haired woman rushed over her face, red with fury. "Mr. Walker, I recorded everything. They will not get away with this. They will pay for what they did." Ethan lifted his hand slightly to calm the growing chaos, but his heart pounded harder as he heard his name shouted from different corners. People recognized him. That had never been a problem in a boardroom, but here in the middle of an airport, surrounded by angry eyes, it ignited something real. "I am serious," the purple-haired woman continued. "People are watching my live stream. More than 5,000. And it has only been 5 minutes. A group of elderly passengers slowly approached. A woman wearing a pearl necklace took Ethan's hand, her voice trembling with an emotion heavier than anger. "Son, I have been flying since the days when black folks had to sit in the back of the plane. I thought those days were gone. But today, I saw them again. Ethan could not speak. A soft but piercing ache crawled into his chest as if the past of an entire generation had reached out and touched his present, whispering, "One more time, but this time do not let them win." On the far side of the waiting area, a giant CNN screen flashed an urgent headline. "A discrimination incident on North Star Flight 287 is spreading rapidly across social media," the anchor said, as Ethan's image being escorted out of the cabin appeared beside her. The passenger's identity has not yet been released. Ethan stared at the screen, his eyes lowering slowly, as if closing an old door. He inhaled deeply and unlocked his phone. 17 missed calls from Patricia, 6 from Marcus, 3 from Vanessa. More than 100 messages from partners, colleagues, media outlets. And it had only been 10 minutes since he left his seat. Ethan called Patricia first. "I was removed from the flight," he said plainly. The silence on the other end sounded like a bomb detonating. "Ethan, they did not know who you are." "No," he answered. "And that is exactly why we need to talk." "What do you want to do?" Patricia asked, her voice pulled tight like wire. Ethan clenched his fist. "Call the private jet. I want to be at LAX before that flight lands." Behind him, the crowd continued shouting, "We stand with you." His dignity had been torn apart in front of hundreds of people. But that unexpected wave of support, something he never asked for, was the spark that lit his resolve on fire. Ethan turned to Dana. "Can you tell me the next procedure?" "Procedure," she frowned. "You are not charged with anything, not banned from flying, and there is no reason to detain you. You are free to go." Ethan nodded in thanks. As he stepped away, Dana called out, "Mr. Walker, you are not going to let them get away with this, are you?" Ethan's lips curved slightly. "No. And I am not doing it for myself." He left gate B12 and walked into the crowd that cheered and filmed him as if he were a hero emerging from a battle. But inside, Ethan knew this was only the first round. As he entered the main concourse, white light from the overhead dome washed across his face, clearly revealing the sharpened determination hardening within him. Someone shouted, "The video just hit 10 million views. 5 minutes ago it was only 8 million. Oh my God, he is the CEO, and they did that to him." Ethan breathed in slowly. Amid the noise, he focused on one thought: "I cannot let this disappear the way thousands of stories before this have been buried." At the end of the hall, as Ethan stepped outside, the cold Chicago wind slapped across his face, pulling a childhood memory from deep inside him. He saw himself at 10 years old, standing at the doorway of a classroom, while the teacher asked, "Are you sure this is your class?" That same look, that same tone, that same doubt, exactly like today. But this time, Ethan was no longer the boy who had to lower his head and walk away. This time he stood tall. This time he had the voice to speak. And this time he owned the airline those people worked for. "Thomas," he called as he neared the car. "Take me to the private jet terminal. And prepare for an emergency meeting. When that flight touches down in Los Angeles, I will be there standing right in front of them." Thomas nodded his eyes, a mix of shock, shared anger, and pride. As the car door closed, Ethan looked at his reflection in the window and saw himself, not the powerful CEO, not the media symbol, but a man who had endured enough. They just made the worst mistake of their lives. He whispered his voice, not a threat, but the declaration of someone who was about to change everything. And Chicago, the city that had witnessed the beginning of Ethan's journey, would once again become the birthplace of something new. This time, the beginning of a storm no one would ever be able to extinguish. The North Star Gulf Stream. G700 touched down at LAX as softly as a breath, but inside Ethan Walker the sky was shaking like thunder. By the time the wheels kissed the runway, he was no longer a humiliated victim. He had become the one holding the upper hand in a battle unlike anything this industry had seen before. Marcus Reed rushed forward the moment Ethan stepped off the aircraft stairs, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool California air. "Boss, the legal team is ready in conference room A27. Security says Flight 287 will land in 20 minutes. Media crews are surrounding the arrival gate." Ethan nodded. "Good. Block all media access. No one gets to them before I do." His voice was low and soft, but sharper than a blade. A chill passed through Marcus. He had seen Ethan calmly negotiate a merger worth $3 billion without changing expression, but never had he seen this kind of quiet, carrying the force of a tidal wave. Inside the airport's internal meeting room, the 5-member legal team waited in formation. Patricia Green stood at the center, clutching a stack of documents, her eyes stern, as if preparing for the biggest trial of her career. "Ethan," she said, striding toward him, "which direction do you want to take? Direct confrontation, delay, or let the press signal our intent first?" Ethan placed his father's worn leather briefcase on the table, unlocked it, and took out the slightly crumpled boarding pass Sharon had returned to him in the cabin. He set it down like a piece of incriminating evidence. "I want them to look me in the eye," Ethan said, each word striking the tabletop. "Sharon, Linda, and Gregory Holt. None of them leave this airport without facing the consequences." A young attorney spoke cautiously. "But Ethan, we need to be careful. If it leaks that the CEO is directly involved, the opposing side may spin that to their advantage." Ethan lifted his head, his gaze cutting straight through him. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "caution is how justice dies." The room fell silent. Another lawyer tapped the table lightly, as if to ease the tension. "Then we proceed with the direct confrontation scenario. They will be called into a meeting room without knowing you are present," Patricia interjected. "I will begin the briefing. When they think they are talking to me, you walk in." Ethan nodded. "Exactly." A radio announcement crackled to life. "North Star Flight 287 has landed at Gate 32. In that instant, the room froze. Every eye turned to Ethan. He spoke only one word. "Begin." As Ethan, Patricia, and Marcus approached the crew holding area, the entire section had been sealed off from passengers and the media. Every step Ethan took echoed with a slow, heavy cadence, like the measured taps of a judge before delivering a verdict. Sharon and Linda stood inside the temporary conference room, along with Gregory Holt, who was grumbling loudly about being detained. Sharon still wore the same arrogant confidence she had displayed on the plane. Linda stood with arms crossed in defensive hostility, and Gregory shouted into his phone voice, booming, "No, I do not know why I have to wait. I am a platinum customer. This is an insult." Behind the glass door, Ethan watched their faces. He was not angry. Anger was fleeting. What burned in Ethan now was a cold, lethal clarity. Patricia stepped into the room and placed the folder on the table. "Thank you all for being here. We need to clarify the events that occurred on Flight 287. Sharon immediately launched her attack. Good, because I want to make it clear that passenger was the problem. He behaved rudely, refused to cooperate, and threatened flight safety. Linda quickly echoed, "Yes, he argued with us, and we suspected his ticket was not valid." Patricia remained calm, flipping a page. "So you are confirming that the passenger in seat 2A did not have a legitimate ticket, correct?" Sharon said firmly. Gregory cut in. "And obviously I always sit in that seat. I book it every year." I told her to send him to a lower cabin. "I understand," Patricia replied, then raised her eyes to them. "But there is one important detail I want to clarify before we continue." She stepped aside. The door behind her opened. Ethan Walker walked in. The room fell silent. Sharon turned pale instantly, her face stiffening like a cracked statue. Linda jumped to her feet, her hands shaking uncontrollably, while Gregory's jaw dropped, and his phone slipped from his grip, hitting the floor with a sharp, hollow clack. Ethan waited 3 seconds. 3 seconds long enough for the truth to crush every ounce of arrogance in the room. Then he pulled out a chair and sat across from them. "Continue," he said. His voice was soft, but it cut like a knife. Sharon stammered, We never didn't know who I was." Ethan interrupted, gently tilting his head. "Didn't know the man you threw off the plane is the CEO and majority shareholder of the airline you work for." Linda's eyes dropped instantly, her lips pressed together until they turned white. Gregory tried to recover some dignity, but his voice trembled. "I believe it was a misunderstanding." Ethan looked at him, not with anger, but with a coldness that stripped every ounce of confidence from Gregory's words. "You told me I was in the wrong seat. You told me to move aside. You also told me not to complicate the situation." "Did you not?" Gregory lowered his head. Silence tightened the room like a vice. Ethan leaned forward slightly, pressing his palms against the table, his voice low and steady. "I want the three of you to recount every detail of what happened today, but this time not as people who think they have the right to judge." He paused, then spoke with the deep, thunder-like calm of a storm's final roar, but as people who will be held accountable. Sharon broke into tears. Linda trembled violently. Gregory collapsed back into his chair. And Ethan, the man they once treated as someone unworthy of seat 2A, now sat before them, carrying the weight and authority of an entire airline. And this was only the beginning, because when Ethan stood, gathered his documents, and prepared to leave the room, he added one final sentence that shattered the last of their pride. "This conversation is only the first step. We will meet again at the disciplinary hearing, where each of you will face the consequences of the choices you made." And as the door closed behind him, Ethan knew one thing with absolute certainty: the history of North Star Airlines had just entered a new chapter. A chapter written by him. The moment Ethan Walker stepped out of the conference room at LAX, the phone in his pocket vibrated non-stop, as if the entire world were knocking at his door at once. Every step he took down the hallway seemed to amplify the noise rising from afar. The murmurs, the reporters pushing through the crowd, the airport announcements drowned beneath a tidal wave of outrage exploding across social media. In just 4 hours since he was forced out of seat, 2A Ethan's story had expanded far beyond a simple airline incident. It had become the center of national attention. Marcus rushed over, gripping his iPad tightly. "Boss, the video has hit 23 million views across all platforms. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, everyone is talking about you." Ethan stopped walking, his gaze darkening. Sentiment analysis. The hashtag #StandWithEthan is #1 on the national trending chart. 2A for All and North Star scandal are exploding everywhere. International media is starting to report. Marcus inhaled sharply, and most important, hundreds of North Star employees are quietly sharing their own experiences with discrimination inside the company. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. A massive wave was rising, but the question still hovered in his mind whether that wave would sweep away injustice or sweep away the very thing he had spent 17 years building. At the arrivals area, a crowd rushed toward him, gazing at him with a mix of admiration and fury on his behalf. A middle-aged man exclaimed, "There, that's him, the guy they kicked out of first class." A black woman burst into tears. "I have been through what you went through, but I did not have a voice. Thank you for not staying silent." Ethan bowed his head slightly in gratitude, but said nothing. Each word he heard weighed heavier on his chest because he understood that every story was a wound people had carried in silence for far too long. A group of reporters spotted him. "Mr. Walker, are you the passenger who was removed from first class? Which airline are you planning to sue? How did it feel to be humiliated in front of the entire cabin?" Patricia Green suddenly appeared behind him, her voice firm. No interviews, no comments. She pulled Ethan away, but the crowd surged like a rising tide. Ethan kept his breathing steady, refusing to be swept into the storm the media was building around him. When they finally escaped into a secured room, Patricia shut the door and leaned against the table, her eyes fixed on Ethan. "Ethan, this is bigger than you think." Ethan remained silent, waiting. "3 members of the board have contacted me." Patricia continued, jaw tight. "They are worried about the company's image. They think this could affect the stock price. They want to call an emergency meeting about what they call the reckless behavior of the CEO. Ethan let out a short, sharp laugh, cold and painful, but steady. Reckless. "They call buying a first-class ticket and sitting in the seat I paid for." Reckless, Patricia sank into a chair across from him. "They do not care if you are right or wrong. They care about what costs them money." Ethan clenched his fists, but before he could speak, the door burst open, and Marcus rushed in his force, pale. "Ethan, you need to see this." He held out the iPad. A video was streaming live from TikTok, the purple-haired girl from the flight. The video had more than 17 million likes. In it, Sharon's voice rang out, clearly filled with authority and discrimination. "If he refuses to go to economy, we will call security to drag him out." The whispers from other passengers echoed. "He has a ticket. She's going too far." Then came the clip of Ethan staying calm, standing in silence. After that, an Indian passenger. Shiva spoke into the camera, "I have flown North Star for more than 20 years. I have never seen anything this disgusting." The video ended with the purple-haired girl's voice. "If he does not belong in first class, then who does?" Ethan watched the entire video without blinking. When it ended, Patricia exhaled slowly. "You see, Ethan, this is no longer personal. It has become a symbol." Ethan set the iPad down, his fingers tapping lightly on the table as he processed the weight of it. "Do you know what scares me most?" he asked quietly. Patricia met his gaze. "What scares me most," Ethan continued, each word landing with the weight of a verdict, "is people thinking I choose silence." The air in the room tightened sharp like a blade slicing through it. A senior communications officer rushed in breathless. "We have nearly 300 interview requests from major outlets, domestic and international. BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, the New York Times. Everyone wants the CEO's response to the discrimination incident." Patricia looked to Ethan. "How do you want to respond?" Ethan glanced at the first-class ticket, still tucked in his father's worn leather briefcase. Just one ticket. One seat. Yet it had become the battleground of a fight millions were watching. "I want to speak the truth," Ethan said. But not to the media. Marcus frowned. Then to whom Ethan looked at both of them, his eyes sharp as steel. To the board of directors. Patricia shot up from her chair. Ethan, they are trying to remove you. Then let them try. Ethan stood adjusting his jacket. I will speak to them first. Not to ask for permission, but to warn them that if they do not stand on the side of justice, they will fall with those who insulted me today. Marcus stepped back. You are going to confront them directly. No, Ethan replied. I am going to teach them the lesson that today's cabin taught me. And what lesson is that? Patricia asked. Ethan lifted his father's old leather briefcase, its worn surface catching the light. That silence, he said softly, is also a form of complicity. He stepped out of the room, his footsteps echoing across the tiled floor. And as he pushed open the door to the executive chamber at LAX, where the entire board was waiting, only one thought burned in his mind. If they wanted a war, he would give them a war. Not with rage, but with truth, with dignity, and with the strength of a man who had been judged for far too long, not by his talent, but by the color of his skin. Ethan Walker was ready, because from this moment on he was no longer fighting for himself, but for everyone who had ever been denied the seat they deserved. The temporary executive chamber at LAX glowed under harsh white lighting, the kind of cold illumination found in places where decisions are made that can alter the fate of an entire corporation. When Ethan Walker stepped inside, every conversation abruptly stopped. 12 board members sat around a long glass-topped table, their eyes locking onto him, like blades aimed at prey that had willingly walked into the territory of those who wield quiet, calculated power. No one stood to greet him. Not a single respectful nod. Only the tension swelling, silently expanding like a balloon on the verge of bursting. At the head of the table sat Harrison Wells, 70 years old, his face carved by decades of authority and arrogance. Arms crossed, he leaned back as if he owned the room. His voice cut through the air with the confidence of a man who believed he had controlled this board long before Ethan ever existed. Ethan, we called this emergency meeting because your uncontrolled behavior has damaged the company's image. Ethan didn't sit. He remained standing, gaze steady as it moved across each board member. Uncontrolled behavior, you mean buying a ticket, sitting in the seat that belonged to me, and being thrown off the aircraft. A few members looked down, guilt flickering across their eyes, but Harrison did not budge. Ethan, this is not about whether you were emotionally right or wrong. This is business. North Star's stock fell 6% in 2 hours. More than 10 contracts have been put on hold. The media is using your name in every negative headline. And what about what actually happened on that plane? Ethan's voice was low, cold. Blatant discrimination, abuse of authority by the crew, a passenger treated like an intruder in the seat he paid for. None of that matters to your business. Harrison tapped his finger on the table, each tap heavy and dripping with mockery. Don't idealize this, Ethan. We do not run a charity. We run an airline worth tens of billions of dollars. Your responsibility is to protect that value, not ignite a media firestorm. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, not fear, but the bitter truth that power often masks cowardice. Harrison continued, voice smooth but sharp enough to cut. We are considering a vote of confidence. Several believe you have become a divisive figure, and we cannot entrust this company to someone who has turned North Star into an international spectacle. Another member added, public sentiment is a bomb right now. By tomorrow, it could double. We need to cut the fuse before it is too late." Ethan looked at the woman speaking. She could not even look back into his eyes. Those words were not just a betrayal of him. They were a betrayal of every employee who believed a corporation could still stand for ethics and fairness. "If you want to vote," Ethan said, his voice dropping into something dangerously calm, "then vote. But before you do, understand one thing." He slowly placed the boarding pass onto the table. The room fixated on it, as if it were evidence of a crime. "What is destroying North Star is not me," Ethan said. "It is the culture that allowed people like Sharon Linder and Gregory Holt to believe they had the right to decide who deserved to sit in a seat they did not pay for." A female member, the youngest among them around 50, spoke with a slight tremor in her voice. "Ethan, we understand the issue, but the financial risk." "Financial risk," Ethan cut in. "Or the risk that North Star will be forced to face the truth." Silence swallowed the room again. Harrison smirked. "Enough. We will vote now. If the majority agrees, you will be suspended until an independent audit of your conduct is completed." Ethan stood still, fists tightening his father's words, echoing in his mind. "No one has the right to take your voice unless you place it in their hands." Marcus stood pale in the corner. Patricia gripped her folder so tightly, her knuckles whitened her eyes, burning with fury she could not express. Harrison distributed the electronic ballots. 1, 2, 3. Each click echoed like nails being hammered into Ethan's career. With 3 votes left, the count stood at 6 in favor of suspension, 3 against. Ethan looked down. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear of losing his position, but from the pain of realizing these people would rather protect a fabricated image than protect what was right. Harrison glanced at him, wearing a thin, paper-like smile. "We only have 3 votes left." An older board member, Mr. Parker, looked at Ethan for a long moment. He was the one who had trusted Ethan 4 years ago when North Star was collapsing. Slowly, Parker pressed no. The count shifted to 6, yes, 4 no. Harrison scoffed. Next, Linda Reeves. Linda belonged to the neutral faction. She looked at the screen, then at Harrison, then at Ethan. Her hand trembled. She pressed her vote. No. 6 to 5. The room buzzed whispers, tightening the air like stretched wire. All eyes landed on the final voter, Margaret Chen, 72. The oldest shareholder, a woman who had invested when North Star was still a struggling airline on the brink of bankruptcy. She stared at Ethan silently. Her gaze was soft, yet heavy, as though she had lived long enough to recognize when truth required someone willing to sacrifice themselves for it. Harrison attempted a thin smile, his voice gentle, but laced with pressure. "Margaret, think of the company." Margaret lifted her head, looking straight into Ethan's eyes, as if seeing through him all the generations behind him, all those she believed deserved to be protected from injustice. Then she pressed her vote. No. The screen flashed 6 votes. No 6 votes. Yes? Motion to suspend the CEO failed. Harrison shot to his feet, face flushing as if he had been slapped. Patricia exhaled so sharply she had to grip the table for balance. Marcus nearly burst into tears. Ethan did not smile, did not sigh, did not show a trace of triumph. He simply looked at them and spoke quietly, yet with a force that rolled through the room like thunder beneath still water. "I hope you understand. I am not here to protect my seat." He pointed at the boarding pass. "I am here to protect what you have forgotten. Respect." Then he turned and walked out, leaving behind a room where power had just been forced to bow to the truth. Out in the hallway, Ethan closed his eyes, pulling in a deep breath. He did not know how many battles still waited for him, but he knew one thing for certain from this moment on. He was no longer just a CEO who had been insulted. He had become a symbol, and a symbol cannot afford to fall. The news of Ethan surviving the suspension vote spread like wildfire streaking across dry grass. But as he stepped out of the conference room, before his breath could even steady, something bigger, darker, and far more dangerous waited for him in the hallway, as if fate had no intention of ending the storm it had unleashed on him. A young man stood leaning against the wall, head bowed, hands trembling slightly. As Ethan approached, Marcus immediately stepped forward defensively. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded. The young man lifted his head. It was Michael Reeves, the economy-class flight attendant from the disastrous flight. His face was pale, his eyes bruised from exhaustion, or perhaps from the weight he had been carrying. "I need to speak to Mr. Walker," Michael said, his voice rasping as though strangled from the inside. Ethan placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder and stepped forward. "What do you need to tell me?" Michael swallowed, hard eyes darting away before locking onto Ethan's with the desperation of someone summoning every bit of courage he had left. "You do not know me, but I know you." Ethan waited silently. "I heard everything. What happened today was not an accident, not a mistake, not because they thought you were in the wrong seat." Michael pulled his phone from his uniform pocket, his finger shaking as he opened an audio file. "You need to hear this. It will change everything." Ethan's eyes did not flinch. "Play it." A soft static crackled. Then Sharon's voice filled the hallway, but not the polite professional tone she used in front of passengers. This was her real voice, sharp, venomous, dripping with prejudice. "I am sick of people like him. Think having money means he can sit wherever he wants. Seat 2A is for Mr. Holt. I am not letting someone like him sit next to real VIP guests." Then Linda's voice, lower, but just as cold, chimed in. "Just send him to the lower cabin. If he argues, call security and be done with it. I do not want to look at people like that in first class." Sharon laughed lightly. He boarded with that arrogant look. "Give me one reason, and I will drag him out myself." The words hit Ethan in the chest like a punch, not because he had not suspected the truth, but because now it was raw, undeniable, and carved into evidence. Michael's trembling voice followed. "There is more." The recording continued. A male voice appeared familiar enough to make Ethan's blood run cold. "Gregory Holt, do it. Give me that seat. You know who I am. I am not sitting next to someone like him. If needed, use a security excuse. I will back you up." Ethan closed his eyes for a single second. Just one. But enough to compress the explosion inside him into something sharper, deadlier controlled. When he opened them, his gaze was forged steel. "Where did you get this recording?" Michael lowered his head. "I recorded them during the pre-flight briefing. I heard them mention you and how they wanted to teach you a lesson. But I did not dare say anything. I was afraid of losing my job, afraid of a retaliation." Ethan looked at him, at this young man trembling, not from fear of punishment, but from crossing the biggest line of his life. "Why did you come to me now?" Michael lifted his head, his eyes red, but burning. "Because I cannot sleep anymore. Because I heard the way they talked about you like you were trash. Because I watched you get thrown out of your seat even though you did nothing wrong. And because I refuse to be the person who stays silent and watches injustice happen another time." His words struck Ethan so deeply that he had to inhale slowly to steady himself. "Thank you," Ethan said, each word weighted with absolute sincerity. "No one should have to stand alone in this," Marcus quickly asked. "What do we do next?" Ethan turned sharply, walking so fast Marcus had to chase him. "We use the truth," Ethan said. "We release the recording." Marcus froze. "You want to go public right now?" Ethan did not break stride. "No. The media will wait for me, but the board will not." Patricia appeared from the end of the hall, almost running toward them. "Ethan, the stock is plummeting. This situation is spiraling out of control." Ethan raised his hand, stopping her. "It is not out of control." He turned to Michael. "You are coming with us." Patricia looked at Michael, then at the phone in his hand. Horror flickered in her eyes for a brief second. "Ethan, are you sure we have no other choice?" Patricia drew a deep breath. "Then we do it your way." Ethan stopped outside the conference room where the board was still discussing the crisis. He turned to Michael. "You do not need to say anything. Leave that to me." Ethan pushed the door open. Silence fell instantly as he re-entered. Harrison Wells frowned, annoyed. "What now, Ethan? The meeting is over." Ethan placed Michael's phone on the table and pressed play. Sharon's voice filled the room. Linda's voice followed. Then Gregory Holt's. Discrimination, collusion, arrogance, the truth. All of it spilled into the air of a room that looked immaculate on the outside, but had been rotting from within. When the recording ended, no one spoke. Harrison's face drained of color, as if he had been punched in the gut. A board member whispered, "Oh my God." Margaret Chen placed a hand over her heart, her eyes trembling. Parker slammed his folder shut. This is severe misconduct. If this goes public, North Star will face the largest class action lawsuit in its history. Ethan looked at each of them, his voice slow, but hitting like iron, striking the table. "You said I was harming the company." He pointed at the phone. "But this culture, this bias, these people are the ones destroying North Star." No one could respond. No one dared meet his eyes, because now the truth had become Ethan's sharpest weapon, and he was no longer fighting alone. Outside, social media roared like a storming ocean. Inside, the board was cornered by evidence they could not deny. And Ethan, the man forced out of seat 2A just hours earlier, now held the key to rebuilding an entire culture that had decayed from within. "This battle," Ethan said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder, "is only the beginning." News of the recording presented to the board spread like fire hitting a barrel of gasoline, and within 1 hour, North Star Airlines descended into a level of chaos the company had never seen in its history. Ethan Walker had barely stepped out of the boardroom, not even reached the end of the hallway, when Patricia rushed up behind him, breath short, voice urgent. "Ethan, the internal system is exploding. Hundreds of employees across multiple branches are staging sick-outs. Several colleagues of Sharon and Linda are coming forward saying they were silenced for years, and now they are starting to reveal everything." Ethan halted mid-step. He knew the truth would shake the system, but he had not expected it to trigger an earthquake capable of cracking the very foundation of the corporation. "What about the passengers?" Ethan asked, his voice betraying a flicker of concern. Marcus hurried in, holding a status board. "Many North Star flights are delayed. Some passengers since this morning are demanding refunds because they do not want to fly with an airline associated with discrimination." And Ethan narrowed his eyes. "And what else?" Marcus lifted a tablet screen for him to see. On it was Gregory Holt, sitting in the studio of a conservative news channel, his expression twisted in exaggerated misery voice, trembling as if he were the true victim. I was just a passenger who wanted my seat. That man Walker threatened the crew. I was dragged into a situation I had nothing to do with. Now social media is attacking me and my family. Ethan clenched his jaw, but did not let the anger cloud his judgment. Patricia turned up the volume. The host continued, "There are reports Mr. Walker is the CEO." "What do you think of that?" Gregory scoffed. "If he truly is the CEO, he should have behaved properly instead of letting the situation turn into a circus." Ethan felt a tightening in his chest, not because of Gregory's words, but because of the applause from part of the audience. People who did not care that the truth had already been exposed. They only needed someone to reinforce their prejudice. Patricia gently touched Ethan's arm, grounding him. "Do not let them rattle you. We have the truth." But truth does not always win as quickly as one hopes. When they walked into the operations room, a new wave of updates crashed over them like a flood. A communications officer reported Mr. Wells's email was hacked. Several documents showing he ignored discrimination complaints for 2 years have leaked. Another added activist groups are gathering at North Star headquarters in Chicago demanding reform. The press is flooding in like a dam has broken. Marcus received another message from legal. Multiple law firms are preparing a class action suit. If we do not handle this correctly, North Star could lose billions of dollars. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, long enough for the storm inside him to swirl, then settle into something, no longer anger, but willpower. Good Ethan said so calmly that everyone lifted their heads. "We must let the truth clean this system, no matter the cost." Patricia looked at him, her gaze softening, seeing again the man she had trusted from the first day she worked with him. "Then what is your plan?" Ethan scanned the room, then spoke. "We need to do 3 things immediately." He raised one finger. 1, release the recording nationwide with an official statement. No evasions, no cover-ups. A second finger. 2, suspend the entire involved crew, launch an independent investigation, and issue disciplinary action within 24 hours. A third, 3, summon every North Star employee to an internal live stream tonight. I will speak to them directly to restore trust. A staff member timidly asked, and the board, Ethan looked toward the glass wall, the runway stretching endlessly under fading afternoon light. "The board will not dare touch me again," he said. The truth has already slipped beyond their control. Marcus nodded instinctively. "What will you tell the employees?" Ethan turned his eyes glowing with a fire he had never allowed himself to show until now. "That I do not lead North Star to protect the reputation of an airline." He placed a hand over his chest. "I lead it to protect the people inside it." The door opened. A senior communications director announced, "The media is assembled. Say the word and the entire country will listen." Ethan drew in a deep breath. "All right, prepare the press conference." As he stepped into the hallway, news helicopters circled LAX reporters, shoved microphones across barricades. Camera flashes burst like lightning, filling the corridor. Through the chaos, Ethan walked with his back straight, his stride steady and commanding each step, falling like a hammer against the rotten walls of an unjust system. And in that moment, just before the doors opened to reveal the entire world waiting for him, Ethan whispered a single line only he could hear. "If they want to know who truly deserves Seat 2A," his hand tightened, "I will show them." The atmosphere at the media plaza outside the LAX entrance was thick like the air before a storm erupts. Hundreds of reporters pushed forward microphones aimed at the podium. Thousands more stood behind the security barricades, half raising signs in support of Ethan Walker, the other half shouting attacks, fueled by Gregory Holt and extremist groups. When the automatic glass doors slid open and Ethan stepped into the flood of camera lights, the entire plaza seemed to hold its breath. His eyes sharpened, steady and calm. Not the calm of someone avoiding conflict, but the calm of a man who had chosen to confront it head-on. Patricia stood behind him. Marcus to his left got their faces filled with absolute trust in him, as though he were the only compass they had in this storm. Ethan placed both hands on the podium. His voice rose deep and clear, carving through the noise and into every pocket of air in the square. For the past 4 days, North Star Airlines has faced the greatest shock in its history, and so have I. He swept his gaze across the crowd. But crises do not change who we are. They reveal who we truly are. To the right, Gregory's group began shouting, but Ethan continued unfazed. Today I will say this one last time. The right to fair treatment is not a privilege. It is the undeniable right of every passenger who steps onto our aircraft. A CNN reporter called out Mr. Walker. What is your response to the accusation that you deliberately staged the situation to gain media attention? Ethan looked straight into the camera. If anyone believes I wanted to be dragged out of a first-class seat and humiliated in front of hundreds of people, then they understand nothing about the weight of that humiliation. His voice dropped cold as a blade placed on the table before the strike. But that humiliation opened the door for me to see a larger truth. North Star Airlines has allowed far too many people to experience the same thing. Another reporter shouted above the crowd, "What about Mr. Holt's organization? They claim you are turning the airline into a political weapon." Your response? Ethan stood taller, eyes gleaming like sharpened steel. If fairness is considered political, then the people saying that are the proof that fairness is exactly what they fear. The entire plaza erupted. But before Ethan could continue, feedback rang out from below. Gregory Holt had climbed onto a large equipment case, grabbed a reporter's microphone, and shouted, "Do not let him fool you. He wants to take what is yours. He is not a victim. He is the problem." A handful of people behind him joined the chaos. Airport police began moving in, but Ethan raised a hand, signaling them to stand down. Then he stepped down from the podium, walking several steps until he stood face to face with Gregory through the metal barricade only a few meters apart, but separated by an entire world view. "Mr. Holt," he said loud enough for every microphone to capture his voice. "You can hate me. You can invent stories. You can appeal to people who need someone to blame. But what you cannot do is distort the truth." Gregory snarled. "The truth is, you did not deserve seat 2. Ethan looked straight into his eyes, unblinking. "The truth," he said, "is that anyone who pays for seat 2A has the right to sit in seat 2A, whether they are black, white, brown, yellow, anyone. And the other truth," he stepped half a step closer, "is that what scares you is not me sitting there. What scares you is that I proved you wrong the moment you tried to force me out of it." A furious roar came from Holt, but before he could speak again, a group of passengers from the flight burst to the front, shouting, "We saw it, Walker is right. He was mistreated, justice for the man." They dragged out, the chants spread like a wave, crashing across the entire plaza. Gregory stumbled back, losing control for the first time. An NBC reporter shouted from the left, "Mr. Walker, What is your final message to passengers across the country? Ethan stepped back onto the podium, placed a hand on the microphone, and looked directly into the center camera, as if speaking to each person watching from their home. "I am not here to win," he said, voice weighted like an oath. "I am here to change." The plaza fell into a hushed stillness. "And I promise you this. On any flight of North Star Airlines, no one will ever again be asked whether they belong here. From this day forward, everyone belongs." Behind him, Patricia touched her earpiece, then rushed to him and whispered, "Ethan, breaking news. North Star stock has climbed 6% in the last 30 minutes. Ethan did not answer. He simply looked out over the ocean of people chanting his name. Not like fans following a star, but like citizens clinging to hope. Hope that in a world full of prejudice and bias, someone was finally standing up, not to claim a seat for himself, but to open the path for everyone else. Ethan inhaled deeply, the wind from the runway sweeping across his shoulders like a reminder. The fight was far from over, but today, for the first time since he was dragged out of seat 2A, he felt he had reclaimed what truly belonged to him. Not a first-class seat, his dignity. And he would defend it for everyone until his very last breath. Looking back at Ethan Walker's entire journey, from the moment he was pulled out of seat 2A to the second he stood before the nation to defend the dignity of every passenger, we see an undeniable truth in any organization. Culture is not built by slogans. It is built by courageous choices made in the hardest moments. From the perspective of a specialist in organizational leadership and human behavior, Ethan did more than handle a crisis. He redefined how a corporation confronts its own failures. He did not hunt for witches, he repaired the system. He did not search for enemies, he searched for solutions. And that is what transformed North Star from an airline into a symbol of change. If this story resonated with you, please like to help spread the message of dignity and respect. Subscribe to continue following the journeys where justice, courage, and kindness stand at the forefront. And comment the phrase, "Always respect," to remind one another that every lasting change begins with how we choose to treat a single human being.